Me clearly. This is my first time doing this, and this is going to be the first time you see my face. Hello, everyone. We're probably not going to, you're not going to be seeing me, but you're going to see what I'm going to be doing. And there'll be several times that I enlarge this video so that you can actually see the workstation I'm working at. But most of the time, you're going to see my hands moving around in here. So I'll move the camera in closer, and you'll also see the software that I'm going to be using. So real quick, just a real quick intro or bio on me. My background is law enforcement, forensic photography, crime scene, and evidence. I'm a certified evidence photographer. And in 2003, a fellow named Sonny Trimble from the Army Corps of Engineers asked me if I wanted to go to Iraq and assist in investigating mass graves to prosecute Saddam Hussein. And that's where I first got introduced into archaeology. The entire team was archaeologists. We were investigating mass graves, and I was in charge of all the photography. After that, maybe 10 years ago, we got started with a veterans curation program where I train veterans how to use equipment like you see here to photograph artifacts. So I'm not an archaeologist. I am a photographer. And what I'm going to show you today is a basic tabletop setup. So let's just real quick, and I'm not really a kind of person that likes to read PowerPoint slides, but you will get this PowerPoint at the end of this session. So let's start off by just telling you what we're going to be doing here. Three things I want to touch on is some basic photography instructions or principles, how to end up getting museum quality images right off of a tabletop setup, and then how to develop and maintain a quality control program. So how do you get consistent results with multiple photographers or multiple technicians taking photographs? So let's start with equipment. The basic equipment that I'm going to be demonstrating is a camera on a copy stand. The copy stand has a vertical column. The camera rides up and down on it. The camera, in this case, is a Canon. It's not even a high-end Canon. I think it's a T6i, about a $500 camera. A studio light on the left side, a plexiglass table, and a light source under the plexiglass table. So we'll show you why we do it this way, and then a monitor and keyboard, of course, and some other gadgets I'll be demonstrating. Here's a few samples of some of the tabletop setups that I've already installed and did training and being used by the Army Corps of Engineers now in the Veterans Curation Program. And I encourage you to go to the veteranscurationprogram.org website. It's a wonderful program. We teach veterans how to photograph historic and prehistoric artifacts, along with a bunch of other skills that they learn. So these are just camera stations that are set up at those locations. The four basic principles that I'm going to be talking about is composition, focus, exposure, and lighting. And like I said, I'm going to zip through these PowerPoints. I'm going to show you how to prepare an artifact, how to prepare a scale, or in this case, a metric scale, or it could be inches, and how to photograph it with more of a forensic approach than an artistic type approach. So for taking diagnostic type photographs, we want to use this type of setup. So again, I'm zipping through this. I'm not going to really read it, but I want you to see that you'll get a copy of this, and it may be helpful. Exposure, we're talking about exposure and quality control and my contact information. So that's how fast I'm going through a PowerPoint. What I want to demonstrate is, or show you, is that these are the type of photographs that you're going to end up getting with this type of setup. And we use this light source from underneath to totally eliminate background shadows. So none of this was photoshopped, and the people that buy these systems and the people that I train are very happy. They don't have to rely on Photoshop anymore to get pure white backgrounds. So these images are all shot straight out of the camera, no Photoshop, and it's just using a single light source and maybe a reflector. So again, we're going to be shooting basic photos artifacts, and these are all shot perpendicular, so you're shooting straight down on top of an item. So this was turned on its side, and then we would turn it and put it on its base so that you could shoot down inside of it. Again, no shadows on the background, pure white backgrounds. Some objects we have to photograph on a black background. A good example of that would be like clear glass or a white object. But today I'm just showing the white background and how we do those. So this is the goal, to get really good, high quality photographs, fairly high resolution. You can zoom in on these and scroll around and see that you're getting really good, high quality photographs with absolutely no shadows on the background. All right. So, and then please excuse me if I'm stuttering or nervous sounding, that's because I haven't done this before. So bear with me. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you the software we're going to be using and the equipment we're going to be using. So let me shut these down and start up the camera software. And I'll go through the settings and things like that with you quickly. But first thing that we do when we're photographing an artifact is to prepare it. And I'm going to move over to our prep table, which I have set up here, and I'll enlarge the video so you can see it full screen, so you can see what I'm going to be doing. So on the prep table, we have pretty much everything we need to prepare the artifact for photography. And it starts off with a sheet of plexiglass that you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. And they have little felt tabs on the base, on the corners. All right, so all our artifacts that we're going to be photographing are about the size of your hand or smaller. We're not doing very large artifacts, even though we can on this camera station. But for today, I'm just going to show one or two artifacts and how to photograph them. All the artifacts that we photograph, we never put it directly on that plexiglass. We have to elevate it slightly above the plexiglass. So some of the things that we have are erasers, these white erasers that you could find at any office supply store. We have clay, this stuff called tacky wax. This is really good for holding an artifact when you have to set it up on its edge and make sure that it doesn't fall either way. And then we're going to use a piece of eraser to elevate the artifact. So I'm going to take this body sherd, which is decorated on one side and undecorated on the other side. So the first thing we want to do is photograph the decorated side. And I'm going to set it down on top of the plexiglass, on top of that eraser. So that eraser is actually smaller, but big. It's smaller than the artifact, but big enough to hold it in place. The next thing I want to do is get a scale in there, a metric scale. So I have a larger one and a smaller one. You may use inches, you may use metric. For today's training, we're just going to use the metric scale. A small piece of paper, a piece of clay, and we're going to put the clay down on the paper, and we're going to use the clay to hold the scale at the right height, because I want the scale to be exactly at the same focal plane as the top of that artifact. So I know my hand's in the way right now, but I'll show you what I'm doing. So I'm taking the scale and jamming it into the clay. Let's see if I can do this correctly, so that it's at the same height as the top of the artifact. If I turn it too far, it'll fall over, but I think you get the idea. That's all we have to do to prepare the artifact. We want the scale at the same height as the surface of the artifact. Then we're going to go back to the camera station, and I'll adjust that, stand by. And we're going to take this prepared sheet of plexiglass and lay it on top of the larger piece of plexiglass that we have elevated above the light table. So this is an LED light panel, and there's a switch over here on this side. You can see when I turn that on, that illuminates nice even light underneath the artifact, underneath this thick sheet of plexiglass. And on the left side over here, I have a studio light. And that studio light is the sole light source for the artifact. Right? So what I'm going to be doing is using, once I turn the software on and start demonstrating that, I'm going to be using the plexiglass to move the artifact around, and I'm going to use the paper to move the scale. And ultimately, we want them to line up and so that we could use the scale for measurements or for diagnostic photos, things like that. I also have sheets of black cardboard, poster board that I've cut out. And if you're photographing really small artifacts, you can block some of this light so we don't have all that white light shining from underneath. And you may put some through in the back, so we're reducing the amount of light coming from underneath, and we have a lot more control. I think I can make this a little darker so you can see what I'm talking about and maybe focus it better. All right, so now I'm going to minimize this and start the software. So you could see what I've done here. This is, it's out of focus because we haven't told the camera to focus yet, but this is software that's comes with Canon cameras. Nikon also makes software that you can tether the camera to. It allows you to do remote shooting. We have what's called a live view screen right now. And I can tell the camera to focus by double clicking in the center. There's a whole lot of settings that have already been preset that because when you first look at the software, it looks a little bit overwhelming to non-photographers. There's a lot of settings and applications that are either preset or they just don't apply to the type of photography we're doing. So right now I know that that artifact is in the center. I have this white rectangle over it. If I put this and if I double click on the white rectangle, I get a green box and it tells me that the camera found something to focus on. If I have it over here in the white area and double click, the camera's looking for something to focus on and it couldn't find it, so I got a red box. So I'm going to put it back over top of this blurry blob that I know is the artifact, double click, and that gives me a starting point. So I could see that I want to make this much bigger. So the next thing I do is come over to the camera and lower it. And before I do that, let me show you, there's a setting here for continuous autofocus. So I'm going to click that box. I'm also going to make it a little bit brighter so that you can see what I'm doing. All right, and now as I lower the camera, the focus follows. If I raise it, the focus follows. There's a little bit of a delay because it works off of contrast. So the camera's actually looking at whatever it sees in that rectangle and trying to find something to focus on. So now that I have the size that I want to uncheck this continuous autofocus box. Now I'm locked in on that level. So I'm focused on the surface of that artifact, and I can move my scale into place. If you watch the little video down in the corner, you could see what I'm doing. So I'm using the plexiglass to move the artifact. I'm not touching the artifact anymore. And I'm using the paper to move the scale. And I want to be able to read those numbers, the metric numbers. So I might raise the camera up a little bit to make it a little smaller. And if I double click, I'm told the camera to do a single focus. Now I have room for the scale. And I have grid lines that are visible, vertical grid lines that you can see right here, going up and down throughout the live view screen. So what I do is I take the plexiglass and move the artifact over so the left edge of the artifact is touching that one of those grid lines. Then I'll use the paper to move the scale so that the 0 mark on the scale is on that same grid line. And since all I need to know is the numbers and the word metric, I cut off the rest of the scale, crop all that out, so that all the images that I shoot and the people that I train to shoot, you want to put teach them to use minimum amount of scale, maximum amount of artifact. So fill the frame with as much of the artifact as you can and the minimum amount of scale necessary. And then we want to kind of center it left and right. So we don't want it to be way over to the right, way over to the left. So you just use the plexiglass and fine tune it. And so now we've done focus and composition, which was like page 2 or 3 of the PowerPoint. Focus and composition is just centering it, getting it to getting the scale lined up. And you'll notice that the scale is just as sharp as the surface of the artifact. If my scale was down on the surface of the plexiglass, the scale would be useless. you couldn't transfer measurements from the scale to the artifact, but here you can because it's at the same focal plane. It's at the same height as the artifact itself, the surface of the artifact. All right, so I'm now going to work on exposure and lighting. So right off the bat, I'm just going to take a test picture. So there's some other things that we can do. So before I take a test picture, let me just show you. I can do a zoom focus. So say I want to make sure that this little circle here is focused. I can do a 5x magnification of that. I can manually focus it. So I purposely knock it out of focus and then manually focus it. Again, just using the mouse. I'm not touching the camera. Once I turn the camera on, I don't have to touch the camera again. I'm using the software for everything. You could do a 10x magnification, and that gets a little hairy because it's super big. But if you wanted to focus down into that circle, into that hole, you could tell the camera to focus by double-clicking the rectangle or the square. But you'll see that it focused on the outer edge. If I want to focus down inside here, I could manually focus it with these little arrows. So now I'm focused down inside. All right. But for this picture, I really want to rely, and you can rely heavily on just putting this on the surface, double clicking the center, and the autofocus works really well. Okay, so that's enough said about focus and composition. Now we're going to talk about exposure. So on this right control panel, I call this the live view screen, and it's actually called the live view screen, and this is called the control panel. And this button up here, this black button, and hopefully you can all see this on your monitors, that's the shutter button for taking a picture. So I'm going to take a picture. I've already preset the software to save that image in a designated folder that I call camera images, and I have it right here on my desktop. And we'll just open that up full screen. And so here's the image we just shot. And we double click, we can look at it as is. It's not a bad shot, but we're going to do a bunch of things to make it even better. So this is where you want to check your composition. You want to check your focus and all these things. You can zoom in and look at fine detail. Make sure there's no dirt or dust particles on the white background because they will show up as a dark blob and it would have to be reshot depending on the type of artifact that you're photographing. If you touch it a lot, if it was a rusty piece of metal, the little particles can fall off of it onto the plexiglass and they would show up in the white background. So it's a good idea to zoom in and check the white background. All right, so I'm looking at that. It might be a little dark. It might be a little too light. So now we're going to play with exposure. So exposure control is handled right here. And all that's doing is lightening or brightening or darkening the overall image. Still haven't played with lighting yet. We still have the light kind of stationary on the left side where we had it originally. And we will move that in a second. But first I want to get the exposure to be close to the real life object. So I'm going to use right now, I don't know if you can see this on your monitors or not, but if you have a large monitor, you can see that there's a dash underneath the +1 here on this exposure control. So if I just move it to the right, each click it goes one exposure or a fraction of an exposure brighter. You could see it getting way too bright on the screen. So I can come back and I can fine tune my exposure, just keep clicking the left arrow until I get it to where I think it's a good exposure. And the way that I recognize an exposure as being a correct exposure is it goes back to my days in forensic photography where you had to testify to the pictures you're presenting in court and you're saying this is a true and accurate representation of this object when I photographed it. So what we're trying to do is make a true and accurate representation of this artifact under these lighting conditions. So to me, that's closer to the actual color, maybe just a little bit darker, which brings us almost back to where we were. And I'll do another test shot and I'll review the test shot. In the thumbnail, you can see it's slightly darker. So I am going to go ahead and make it a little bit brighter. So We're going to do one dot to the right or one exposure to the right and take another test shot. I've been talking and looking at the screen, so I haven't looked at, if there's questions, I'll have to look at that later because I can't stop right now. I'm in my groove, so to speak. And I'm going to do a couple test shots just to see which exposure I like the best. So actually, we have 4 exposures here. Here's kind of like where we started. Each time I moved that exposure one dot to the right, I was making it one fraction of an exposure brighter. This is too bright. This is just right. And this is too dark. So I'm going to go with that one. So I now know that my exposure needs to be one dot back. So that's where I want to be. Next thing is lighting. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is move this light from its current position and kind of move it around closer to the wall. And as I do that, watch the surface of the artifact, which actually has a pattern on it that's not really visible where the light is positioned now. But as I move the light, you'll see that pattern come out a lot clearer. So I'm moving the light towards the back, and you start to see that there's diagonal lines that are actually visible with the light in that position, but not visible when the light is over here. So lighting is super important, and being able to move that light into different positions to show a feature or the details of a feature is real important. So I'm going to put the light back again towards the wall and kind of point it towards the artifact. And now I can see all those diagonal lines going north and south and east and west, and I have a much better, more accurate photograph or representation of this artifact. Because if you're photographing these artifacts for a database, and a researcher or a student or whoever's going to be looking at these images doesn't have access to the physical artifact, you're going to have to give them the best, most accurate photograph you can that shows the pattern, if there is a pattern, or whatever the surface detail or feature is. So now if I take a picture and compare it, so here it is with the light in the first position, and here it is with the light moved a foot further back. When I say further back, I don't mean away from the light, the artifact, but along the wall next to the table. And so now we have a good, accurate representation of the pattern. We could see the lines going in both directions. The next thing that we would want to do is maybe lighten some of these shadows on the right side, and the left side. Let me open that back up again. The left side is also a little bit too bright for me because, and you'll have this because the light source is coming in from the left. So if I zoom in on this and come over here to this left edge, you could see that it's kind of light. And on the right side, the shadows are so dark, they're pitch black. So what we want to do is equal that out, or at least reduce the shadows somewhat. We don't want to get rid of them because the shadows help define the shape. So to do that, I've got this nifty gadget here. I don't know if you can see that. Let me do the full screen video. So this guy here is just it's called a paddle light. These are little LED light paddles that you can use to light up specific areas of an artifact. You can reduce the amount of light that comes out of it, or you can increase the light. If you don't have one of these, you can make one of these. This is a piece of foam board with a little stand on it, so it'll sit like that. And it's a reflector, and it'll go on the right side of the artifact to bounce light from the studio light onto the right side of the artifact to kind of soften up those shadows somewhat. So let's go back to the live view screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Without the reflector in place, the right side is somewhat dark. If I get the reflector in real close, it's probably too close, but it's kicking back like 70 or 80% of the light that's hitting the left side, bouncing off of that white card onto the right side, which means you can get away with a single light source and a piece of white cardboard and still get studio quality images. All right, so I'll back this off somewhat. So we still have shadows, but we don't have pitch black shadows. And I'll take another picture just to show you the difference. And these are subtle changes. This is what turns it into a really high quality photo versus like, you know, your first shot is good enough, which I hate that attitude. You don't want to just go, well, that's good enough. You want to try and make it a little bit better. So there it is without the reflector. There it is with the reflector. And it's a subtle change, but see the difference. Now, if there was any feature or detail that was in the shadow area, we lighten it up to so that you could see that, all right? Second trick is the left side's really bright. Not really bright, but I want to tone that down a little bit. So I'm going to take a piece of black cardboard. Let me zoom this in. That I've scribed and folded. And I'm going to use that on the left side to block light. So all I'm doing is I'm going to bring it in, and so that's going to sit on the left side. And let me go back to the live view so you can see how it applies. If I bring it in too close, obviously that's way too close. We're shadowing the entire artifact. But if I bring it back and pull it out slightly, just enough that it's blocking the light from hitting that left edge, but still letting the light hit the rest of the artifact, then I have a much more evenly lit artifact. And I'll take another picture and do another review. So let me go back one. This is with nothing. This is just straight without any of those reflectors or blockers. This is with the reflector on the right. And now this has the reflector and the black piece that's blocking a little bit of light on the left side. And to show you how that helped, and it does change the exposure a little bit. I may have to adjust the exposure, but if I zoom in over here and you look at this left edge, and let me make it a little bit bigger. The shot before that, I didn't have the black piece in place, and you can see how bright that is going along there. Still not bad, but it's much better this way because now we have a defined edge. All right. It's funny that I'm doing all the talking. Normally there's people, like I'm teaching somebody and they're asking me questions, so I'm going to keep going. This would probably be a keeper. There's no need to shoot any more of this one. It shows all the details, the surface details. It's evenly lit. And I'll go back just one more time to show you. This is without any of the reflectors or the blocking cardboard. So the human eye tends to be distracted sometimes with highlights and shadows. So our eyes drawn to the dark areas and the light areas. So by controlling that light and making it more even, we're no longer distracted. We're able to take in the entire image and see all the surface detail. And if you don't have, and you guys are all watching this, you don't have that artifact to look at, but I can guarantee you that this picture is an accurate representation of this artifact. So I would then take that and drag that into whatever collection that we're working on. So here is a little bit of what we call the quality control portion of our show, right? So you've taken all these test shots, you take the one you like the best, you put it into the collection folder, and it's sitting there by itself. And then you also have user folders. So I'm Dave. So ultimately my final images are going to end up in my Dave folder. But first, I need to rename it. So I would rename it with whatever naming configuration you're going to be using at your labs. So let's just say 123-456 is the number associated with this artifact. I want to end that file name with .1a. Reason why is I'm going to flip the artifact over now and shoot the other side, and I'm going to take a few test shots. I may not have to take as many because all the hard work was done on the A shot, and then that one will be the same number .1b. You don't have to follow this procedure, but this procedure's worked very well for us and for people that I've trained. So now I'm going to take the artifact, pick it up, flip it over, put it right back down. Of course, I bumped my scale. My artifact's a little out of line. So there's a feature on this software that lets you overlay the A shot. We'll call it the A shot or the front shot. Overlay that So I just click this show overlay image, and it automatically defaults to this collection folder where I have my 1A shot. And now I have a ghost image of the A shot that's static, it's not moving, right? And then my B shot, or my interior of this object, is live, and I can now rotate it and do what I want to get it to be like the mirror version of the A shot. So I want it to be fairly close to the same alignment. It's not, this overlay feature works really well on certain artifacts, and certain artifacts it's probably more confusing than helpful. If you were photographing a coin and you did the photograph of the heads side, and then you flip the coin over to do the tail side, or a button, or any kind of projectile point, whatever. If you had a circle like a coin, then you could overlay the A shot and then take the live view and match the two circles up. Anyhow, I think you understand what I'm saying. So now I have to realign my scale. The object here is the kind of consistency. If you have your technicians or whoever's doing the photography all doing it the same way, all trained the same way, they all know that you flip this so that you have your A shot like this and your B shot is like this. You don't have the B shot cockeyed. It's a mirror version of the A shot, so that if you printed these and put them into a report, they would be printed side by side. You wouldn't want one straight and one crooked. That's the whole thing about shooting using the overlay, or making sure that you have your second shot kind of the mirror version of the A shot. So here you can see the shot I just took. And we have a slight issue on the left with that side being bright, and knowing what we know from the A shot, all I got to do is block a little bit of that light, because the surface light, the light on the surface of this is excellent. I can see all the little scratches, all the little details. So I don't want to change the position of the light, but I might want to block some of this light coming in from the left. So again, I purposely come in too close so that as I pull it back, I can see when I get to a point where it's doing its job. And I always shoot a picture and review the picture. So here it is without the piece of black cardboard, and then there it is with it. And again, I think this is probably needs to be one exposure darker, so I can now go to exposure, make it one dot darker, and take another picture. Whoops. Take another picture and review it. You can even see, if you have a good monitor, you can see even in the thumbnails that is a little bit darker than this one. And we can see really good detail along this left edge now. And this is actually the natural color of the inside of this artifact. One of the things I want to check is the white space. Since I physically touched the artifact, picked it up, flipped it over, I may have knocked particles off of the surface onto the white background. So I want to zoom in and move the image around, looking at the white space to see if anything moves as I move the image. If there was a piece of dirt in the white and you move the image like this, that spot would move as well. And that would tell you that there's dust or dirt on the plexiglass, and not, or if it doesn't move, it's on your monitor screen. So now that I have a good shot of the interior, I'm going to drag that into the collection folder. And it's right next to my A shot, so I'm going to give it the same name, .1b. So it's 123-456.1b. So that naming configuration, just by adding the .1a and the .1b, anytime, all your .1a shots or all your A shots would be the money shot. That's the shot that has the texture or the surface detail. And then the B shot would be the interior. So exterior, interior, or those kind of things. And as I flip between these two, you'll see that the scale jumps a little bit. Not a big deal, but the artifact's alignment is good. This left corner here, this piece here, should be right over here where my mouse is when I flipped it, and it is over there. So my orientation is good, A and a B shot. At that point, I train the people that I do train, that a manager, an archaeologist, if it's not an archaeologist shooting, then you get an archaeologist manager to look at these images and approve them or disapprove them. If they approve them and say, yep, they're both perfect, I like them, peer review, obviously, or quality control, then they can go into my folder. And they don't go into my folder until they've been reviewed by a manager or reviewed by a supervisor. That supervisor then is held accountable if they're shot incorrectly. So once you've got those two images in, you can go back and delete all the test shots. You don't want to delete them all until somebody has reviewed your images, because they may see something, a second pair of eyes may see something that you didn't see. The scale might be crooked, there might be dirt, the artifacts out of alignment, that kind of thing. So that's how I would photograph this particular artifact. There's really no need, unless your requirements are to shoot a profile shot, to shoot the edge. And I could show you how to do that if you bear with me for a second. I'm going to grab a piece of that tacky wax that I talked about, and I'll show you how we would photograph that if we were asked to photograph the profile. And the same thing goes for like a projectile point. If you were shooting a projectile point and you wanted to show the edge, the worked edge, you might use this tacky wax, which I've actually rolled into a little ball. It's kind of hard to see, so let me make this a little darker. And I don't know if you can see that little ball down here, right? So I'm going to use that ball of wax to hold this upright. So that's sitting upright, and hopefully I didn't use too much of that wax, because you would see it down the edges. And then I want the scale to be up at the same height. So I have to raise my scale up. So let's look at that in the live view screen. And I can see a little of the tacky wax, but I'm going to tell the camera to focus. I'm going to adjust the exposure so you guys can see what we're looking at. So now I might want to bring the camera down a little bit and refocus. So probably you would do this if maybe it was a rim shirred, or you just want to shoot the profile of an object and you want it to sit upright, and you want to show the thickness, you want to show the makeup, the material in it. You want the scale to give you the accurate length. And I always line it up with that left edge so that you can look at the artifact in any picture and come over to the right side, and automatically you can say that's 3.6 centimeters. So by lining the left edge with the 0 mark on the scale, immediately you get an idea of how big your object is. All right, so I know I have a stopwatch going, so I know I'm like almost 40 minutes into this, so I'm going to shoot this quickly and probably give ourselves a little bit of time for questions. But I want to demonstrate this one real quick. So far, I haven't got into a whole lot of photographic theory and principle, like apertures and shutter speeds and things like that. We have the camera, for those of you that do photography, we have the camera set on aperture priority mode, which means we select the aperture, the camera automatically selects the shutter speed. That's set up here, and we've been using f11, which is an aperture setting, as basically our default setting for shooting most of the artifacts, especially if they're flat. But this has a little bit of a three-dimensional shape to it. So I'm going to switch to 22 just to make it easier. Just by doubling that aperture, I'm now going to get a lot more depth of focus, or depth of field is the actual terminology. So I'm going to take a picture, and then I'm going to review it. And magnify it. So yes, I see it. You can see the tacky wax right there, right? But the idea is that we have a good profile shot of this artifact. We zoomed in, we filled the frame. It may show you some information. One thing that I would do differently, and I'm going to do it right now, is raise the light source. If I raise the light source, it will then point down into the little nooks and crannies. So I'm bringing it over a little bit more to the front. I'm raising it up, and now I have a whole different look to that surface, because now the light is filling in all the little shadows that it was creating when it was down lower. And so let me just lighten it a little bit and take another picture. So here it is, which is a good lesson on moving the light around. So when I shot this image, I left the light where it was for the other one. And then I moved the light up, and now we can see all kinds of detail in there. If I was doing this, rather than rushing it through for training, for this seminar, I would take a lot more time and maybe put a reflector in the back. I would hide that tacky wax, but I was just trying to get a good example for you. So it looks like I got a bunch of questions and some chat. Oh, that was from Beth. Thanks, Beth. So let me just fix this real quick. I didn't mean to yell, but I got excited. There's also a thing called a depth of field preview button here, right? So this software will let you simulate what your final image is going to be. And if I had that checked earlier, I would have been able to see that the tacky wax is visible. So I got to do just a little bit of tweaking of the little ball of wax to kind of hide it more, and then reset. And then I can use that grid line. You see that left edge of the artifact, move the scale over, and then center. And I could double check my focus, just double click. Got a green box. Oops. I have to turn off the depth of field to do that. There we go. Green box. And I may tweak the exposure a little bit. I'll add a reflector in the back. And I bump my scale, so we've got to be careful of that. And all this little movement that you see me doing, it's really difficult because we're at extreme magnification. This is only, 3 centimeters. So it's like looking through a telescope. The slightest little movement of the camera or the object becomes a major movement on the screen. All right, so we hid the wax. We kind of like lightened up the background, hid the wax a little bit better so that it appears that it's floating on a white background. You could play with aperture a little bit more for those pro photographers or people that have experience in photography. I just, when I'm training people, I give them 2 choices: shoot at 11 or 22. It makes it easier for training, and it also makes it easier it pretty much covers the types of artifacts that we're shooting. All right, so this is my C shot. I'm going to move it into the collection folder and rename it. Normally we wouldn't have to do 123-456.1C. Normally we wouldn't have to do a profile shot of this type of artifact, but if you did, you just start adding letters for how many views. So there's an A shot, a B shot, and a C shot. Pretty well covers this artifact. And if it was evidence and I was presenting in court, I'd probably be all the way up to M, the letter M. I'd have to shoot every angle you can think of. But if this may be all you need to photograph for an artifact. Alrighty then, a little bit about quality control. One of the things that I've done is develop an operations guide that guarantees consistency. So let me see if I can show this. So one of the things that we do, let me lighten it up a little bit, and we'll go full screen. When I put a system together, I'll also make a guide that shows pretty much everything that I was talking about: how to do focus, how to do exposure. I'm trying to get this a little brighter. and a little sharper. There you go. So it's a step-by-step picture guide. A lot of people say my guides look like a Denny's menu because it's mostly pictures, not much wording. And then at the end, we have views. For instance, projectile points. All projectile points point to the left. Everybody shoots it the same way. And we shoot 3 shots, 1, 2, 3 shots. So you have samples of how you want pictures taken, drills, rim shirts, all these different types of artifacts that you may have in your collection, even miscellaneous. Let me get to a miscellaneous page so you can get an idea. All kinds of artifacts and the proper way to shoot them, the proper way to line them up. I was talking about buttons before and coins. Here we go, some miscellaneous items. Come up with a process for how to shoot these things and have samples of them so that you can train your people to shoot the same way all the time. All right, there's much more for me to talk about, but I think it's time to maybe answer a few questions. So if we're okay with that, Beth, I'm going to do that now. First one comes from, I don't know, Jeffrey Fleischer, maybe. Could you tell us about the lens you're using? Absolutely, I can tell you about it. It's a 35mm macro lens. The cool thing about this lens, which I wasn't able to show you, I can actually hold my hand under it. This lens actually has a light built into it. There's a light underneath, I don't know, let me turn this on. So it's a Canon lens, it's a macro lens. So you could see underneath the light, underneath the lens, there's a light. I don't know if you can tell by that video. It's not expensive. It's a $300 or $400 lens. In the world of photography, that's not expensive at all. As a matter of fact, I don't know if I have it as a PowerPoint. I think I don't talk about specific equipment. If you email me, I can give you the types of equipment. Can you say a little bit more about the camera? It's mounted on a light table. Is this something we can replicate DIY? Yes, absolutely. The camera actually is on a bracket. So if I had that camera mounted directly on the back of this column, this back here where my hand is the actual plate that comes with the column. I had to make I don't know if you could see that, but I had to make a bracket that would allow the camera to be facing the wall rather than facing me. If I mounted it there, it would be facing me. All the images are upside down. So in order to have it right side up, you have to get that bracket. And the funny part is that bracket, I can only get it from one place, and they had to ship it from China, and it got held up and all that stuff. Photographing beads, very small, tiny, shiny beads. Yeah, I think the closest this lens will let us get is an object that's about 1.5 centimeters. So if they're smaller than that, then yeah, you're going to probably need a different camera setup or a different lens, or even they make extension tubes, they make bellows, they make, now you're getting into almost microscopic photography. And this camera is really not designed for doing that. Somebody wants to know where you can buy the guide. That guide was actually made for the Army Corps of Engineers, for the Veterans Program. I have another one that I make when I put together these packages, these camera stations. I don't know that I can give you a price. People are asking price and stuff like that. Am I allowed to talk about that, Beth?
Sure, yeah. The whole non-commercial part of the seminar is that we just don't want you trying to sell them during the seminar.
No, you can all contact me by email if you'd like. But this whole setup that you see was probably the most expensive thing is the camera and the lens, and that combination of camera and lens is maybe around $1,100. The rest of the equipment, of course, the computer is whatever computer you have. Some people just use a laptop, but the bigger monitor obviously is a better choice. So this whole setup, when I put them together and do the installation, is around $5,000. That includes installation and training. So That's all the advertising I will do. The equipment is probably around 3,500, something like that. And that all depends on which camera too. This is not a full frame camera. This is a what they call a micro 2/3, or it's not the high end cameras. It's kind of like a prosumer, not a pro, and it's not a consumer level. It's kind of in the middle. The LED light panel, somebody's asking about that. That was originally something that you could buy those brand new. It was used in for displaying or for doing transparencies, for looking at transparencies, like large 8x10 transparencies, also for drafting. And they're also used for like x-rays, things like that. All the equipment I purchased through a company called B&H Photo out of New York. All the photographic equipment comes from them, and they have all of these things except for the plexiglass. The plexiglass table I built, and it's nothing more than Home Depot DIY stuff. How do you photograph white and light colored objects? Good question. We'd have to use black plexiglass. Use the same table setup, but we don't use the light underneath. I might even have some samples. I don't know if I can get to them quickly, but I might be able to show you. It's really difficult to photograph on a black background because it's very reflective. So I think I had one on a black background. Here we go. So you have to pretty much kill all the lights in the room. Only use a single light source. The black plexiglass will show any piece of dust and I use black plexiglass because it's totally smooth. I've tried black felt, black cardboard, black poster board, and when we're getting in and doing extreme close-ups, you start to see the fibers in the black poster board or the paper or the felt. So black plexiglass is what you need. Someone's asking if there's an equivalent program or software from Nikon similar to what we're using here, and actually there is. Nikon makes software that you can tether your camera to the computer. It's not as user-friendly, even though you saw this software for the first time, maybe the first time when you saw me demonstrating. I find the two softwares to be slightly different. The Nikon software to me is a little more tech-based. Good questions, and they just keep coming. Let's see. Take pictures of textiles using this technique? Absolutely. I haven't, but it could absolutely be done. The only difference with textiles, I would think, is the light, and that might be helpful. The light's going to shine through the weave or through the textile. So I don't know if that's helpful, but you can control how bright that light is coming through by how high. If I raise this plexiglass up higher, this sheet up higher, further away from the light source, then I'm controlling how much light is coming from underneath. I wish I had more time to do this because I would show you a bunch of different artifacts, but I think we're doing okay so far. The software is called, somebody asked, what is the software? It's actually called EOS Utility. The letters EOS and the word utility. And it's a product that is free if you own a Canon camera. It's a free download from their website. I'm not sure what the question is about. Raking light is angle this recorded in metadata? No. The light source. Someone's asking about the metadata, and that might be over my head. So I may not be giving you the correct answer. But let me just explain metadata real quick to some of you. So this image, if I right-click while it's in this software, I could come over, and this is just Microsoft Office software. I can come over to where it says camera properties. I can see the aperture that I set it at. I can see the exposure setting. Remember when I was doing 1 dot to the right, 2 dots to the right, and to make it brighter and darker, so there's the exposure settings. But there's nothing in there about lighting. Lighting is all kind of user defined. So any of these images, if you're looking at them in Microsoft Windows and you want to look at the metadata, you can right click, come down to Properties, Details, and scroll down, and again you have the camera, the aperture, the shutter speed, the exposure settings, and so on. And there's a lot more data available if you're using Canon software to view the metadata. Okay, I think the last thing was, well, here's my contact information if you haven't already gotten it. I think I'm doing pretty good. What do you think? Beth, do you have anything that you want to add?
I don't. I just want to make sure. I think I tried to mark all of the ones that you answered.
All right, let's
just
see.
to double check that we've answered all the ones in the Q&A.
Oh, if you no, let me look at those real quick. So if you find first person says, do you use a color checker for exposure? And I did do a setup in part of South Florida for a person who does conservation of books and artwork, and it was very important for them to have accurate color. And so yeah, we used a color checker, and so you can do a basic white balance with this, where you would, and I can demonstrate that real fast for you, where you have your live view screen, and I usually just white balance the scale. I know that the scale is white. If I didn't white balance it, and for those who don't know, there's different color temperatures for different types of lighting. So for instance, if I put this under tungsten, you could see how it goes blue, right? If it's under a different light source, fluorescent, possibly kind of purplish. But I've preset this software for a custom setting, and this software lets me take this little eyedropper up here and just point to something that's white and sample it. And I know that the scale's white, so I've sampled that and I uncheck it. So I've white balanced this setup for this lighting condition. If I open up a window and the sunlight comes in, my color balance is off. If I turn on overhead lights, my color balance is off. So you've got to have a mini studio type setup where you have control of the lighting for the color. If you find dirt on the background, how do you remove it? A little puff of air. I have this little squeeze ball airbrush. So I would just kind of squeeze and brush it off. If I can't get to it, I use a microfiber cloth and wipe it off. Do you manufacture the plexiglass base? Yeah. Well, when I sell a system, I'll put one together for them, but no, this was made in my garage. So 3D objects, would increasing the f-stop help me with my depth of field so that the top and bottom of the object are in focus? Absolutely, it'll help you. The only problem is if you're photographing a bead, and that's what this person's asking about, you're going to be in so close. The closer you get with the camera, the greater the issue you're going to have with depth of field or depth of focus. And you really know that if you look through a microscope or any kind of really close-up photography, you can set the camera so that it would focus on the surface, but also focus down to the base. When I set this up to shoot at f/22, I know that it's going to focus on the surface of this artifact, but it's not going to focus all the way down to the plexiglass. So that way I won't see. And a good example of that, I'll take the scale out just to show you. If I lay the scale down on the plexiglass, instead of raised up, you can see the scale is out of focus, right? And if I shoot this at 22, I'm gonna look at, even if at 22, with my depth of field preview button on, it's still not in focus. My point of focus, the surface is in focus, but not the scale. I could try going to 32, which is the smallest, to make it even more confusing. And you can see it starts to get a little sharper. This is also a good example of why you put the scale up at the same level as the artifact. All right, probably a long answer to a short question. What about photographing beads? Somebody already asked that. Do you use photo scale stacking for curved artifacts? Photo stacking? No, I haven't. I'm just starting to do that. Basically my training, when I'm doing training with technicians or new people, we don't get that far into advanced photography. We try and teach them how to do the basics and let them get comfortable with the software and learn the basics without getting too far into some of these other things. The height of the light table, I'm not sure what you mean by that. This little light table that I'm touching is maybe an inch thick, and it's sitting on top of the copy stand. Jessica's asking, do you shoot with the lights out? Yes. The only light I have on right now is the studio light. Maybe some lights off in the distance. I'm in an office where it's a home office, so my wife shares this, and she has lights on over in her area, but I have that blocked out. That's it. I think I answered all the questions. What do you think? And look at the time. I didn't do too bad.
Perfect.
I think there's a lot more to do. I don't want to get into a whole nother artifact because it's going to run way past this time. There's a possibility we could do another, maybe an advanced class in the future, or do this again. But I sure appreciate everybody showing up. And if you need to contact me, you have my contact information. Beth, do you have anything to add? Because it looks like I'm actually pretty much done.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone.
Is that it?